Hello, my online crew. I'm going to continue to read that pamphlet that was in the first video. I'm going to start from page 4. And again, this is a video that is, I am literally just reading off of this pamphlet that was created from the Wabash County Historical Museum in 1964. Mary C. O'Hare, that relates Wabash County to the Civil War. There's a lot of goodies in here based on the curator's research, specifically tying to a few things that we've heard about before. In the first video, it mentioned Thomas Jefferson signing the Northwest Ordinance was created prior to his presidency, but as those states start to formulate, he outlawed slavery there, and he wanted to begin to start to outlaw slavery in the United States, and it didn't really happen. And since that time, there was this underground movement of having escaped slaves go through the North to freedom. And if they can't find freedom in the United States, they're going to Canada. So this pamphlet, again, is just describing Wabash County's role in it and other parts of Indiana along the Underground Railroad. So I'm going to start here, the end of page 4. And as you'll notice, this will skip over to the other side of the next page in the scanned document. And I'm going to read pages 5 and 6 for this video, and then I will just continue to do two at a time until we're done. All right, Mr. Daniel Sayre was born in June 1815 in New York and settled in LeGros, Indiana in March 1832. In an era of great activity, the 1840 to 1950s, in the underground 1850s, in the underground slave movement, he lived on what was later known as the Stratton Farm, located about 3 miles north and a little east of LeGros, near Hopewell. Mr. Sayre was known to be active in assisting slaves to freedom. In relating his experiences, he says, "There were 3 stations on the Underground Line in Wabash County and 2 that I know of in Grant County. They were Charlie Atkinson's near Jonesboro, Mose Bradford's near Marion, Fred Kindley's near New Holland, A.A. Peabody's at LeGros, and Maurice Place's at Manchester. I never knew the route from North Manchester. Place kept it secret. And while it happened occasionally that a fugitive was captured between Jonesboro and North Manchester, I never knew of one being overtaken after he reached Manchester. As nearly as can be determined from available information regarding the underground lines running from Newport to Detroit by way of Wabash County, were possibly beginning with Newport." So then here it goes on to explain some of the stops on the Underground Railroad. Bond settlement on Kalen Creek, Randolph County. Kalen Creek runs through West River and Stony Creek townships of the same county. Charlie Atkinson Station near Jonesboro, Grant County, located south and east of Marion on the Mississinewa River in Mill Township. Shugart Station on Deer Creek in Grant County, located in the extreme northeast corner of Liberty Township, 2 or 3 miles west of Jonesboro and just east of the M&L Pike near Marion, being about 75 miles from Newport. Mose Bradford Station, located in the northeastern edge of Marion in Grant County. Today, a section of Marion in the same general area is known as the Bradford Addition. Ashland, now LaFountain, was the first settlement north of Marion. William, Daniel, James, and Smith Grant brothers settled here in 1834. Whether or not they operated an underground station is not definitely known. However, It is known that all four brothers were strong abolitionists and anti-slavery men. Frederick Kindley Station in Wabash County, located on a large knoll in a bend of Rush Creek just above New Holland, south of the village. Peabody Station was located just north of the village limits of LeGros on the old LeGros North Manchester Plank Road. The Peabody Station was approximately 7 miles north and west of Kindley's by road. Maurice Place's station, located at North Manchester. Mr. Place lived on Maple Street in the extreme southwest part of town. Dr. Willis and James Frame are referred to as conductors who aided fugitives to stations north of Place. Dr. Willis and others were known to be on the Underground Railroad at Warsaw, Thomas Mason Station, Leesburg, Kosciuszko County, Indiana, and Stephen Bogue Station, Young's Prairie, and Cass County, Michigan. So again, Wabash in this area had a lot of stops along the Underground Railroad. Frederick Kindley, a staunch, courageous Quaker, brought his family and settled on Rush Creek near New Holland in 1841, bringing 100 apple trees with them. These were planted on what Mr. Kindley called Orchard Knoll and afforded him reasonable success selling his apples at a good price. Margaret Kindley Shoemaker, Frederick's daughter, gives the following information regarding her father's activities. Trains on the Underground Railroad that came to my father's station usually ran at night, so I never saw their arrival or departure. We had no cave or secret place in which to conceal the slaves, but a faithful dog warned us of an approaching stranger in time to get the, again, language here, get the slaves away somewhere. One morning when I awakened, there were 3 big husky men in the cabin. One was as jolly as could be. He said he was the only N-word his master owned, and Martha will wake up in the morning and say, "Bob, go feed the hosses." "No, Bob, thar Martha have to do it himself." Then he would bend over and laugh and shake his head. Each man walked with a heavy club and carried a pistol. I can't recall that more than one came at a time until near the last. Father kept the three men for several days because he was sure he was being watched by unfriendly folks. Finally, he told them, "We will start about 1 o'clock in the morning and get out of the neighborhood before folks are astir." They started on foot for North Manchester. Since the men could not walk together, Mr. Kindley told them how to go, and he followed. They were to go straight through the grove and on up the hill. The slaves had not reached the village when he met a man who asked where them and words going, adding, "I'll bet anything they are runaway and words. If I knew they were, I'd have them arrested." The man was told that they seemed to be walking along very quietly and that a person might get into trouble if he bothered them. He might have told him that he knew very serious trouble awaited anyone who troubled them. Kindley, with his 3 runaways, reached North Manchester without further adventure. He took them to his cousin's home where they were put to bed while he went out to find someone to take them to the next station. Down in town, he met a friend who, surmising Kindley's business, warned him to be careful because there was a man from Kentucky there shelling corn for a distillery. After finding a man to take the slaves on that night, if necessary, he returned to the sleeping men. When asked if they knew a man named McWilliams in Kentucky, one of the fugitives replied, "Yes, sir. He's in partnership with my old master in a distillery, and he would know me as far as he could see me." The men lost no time in dressing and examining their pistols before Kindley took them to the home of Dr. Willis. Dr. Willis said later that night they kept his horse on the trot all night long, after having walked 20 miles from New Holland to North Manchester. Mrs. Shoemaker thought these the last slaves her father helped away, but unfortunately for the historian, she failed to give the year. All right, where's page 6? There we go. She failed to give the year in which the above took place. She said further she did not hear her father speak of trouble until the last, though he felt certain of being suspected of aiding fugitives to freedom. Edward Peabody, son of August A. Peabody, says of his father's station at LeGros, "It is true that fugitive slaves followed the route through LeGros when trying to escape to Canada. I have seen as high as half a dozen leave our barn at once. My father never turned any of them away. I remember one time, especially when there was a deep snow, again, gee, many Christmas, the language here, that an African American was held there in LeGros at Gillespie's, who lived near where the school building now stands. The ex-slave's shoes were taken with him so he would not try to escape. Bill Collins was supposed to be guarding him, but the black man made him escape, shoes or no shoes, running right through the snow in his bare feet. After allowing the Christmas, the verbiage here, after allowing the African American man to get away, Collins always went by the name of N-word Bill. Unbelievable. Again, it was a different time, so not much I can do. About the last man from the slave states that sheltered and hidden our barn was a strapping big fellow, and I hauled him myself to a certain point in the vicinity of North Manchester, where he would be looked after by a Quaker preacher. He told me all about how he came to escape. He had just been sold to an old planter who was said to be hard and cruel to his slaves and owned a plantation in the far south. It seems this man was much liked by white people of the neighborhood who hated to see him taken so far away among strangers. A bunch of white children pitted him and told him he ought to skip out for Canada. They even helped him to get away, so he stated. I could not help but feel anxious for his success in reaching Canada and wished many times I had given him my address with a request that he get someone to write me a letter in case he gained the land of freedom. I think that was in 1859, and I do not remember any more staying in our barn after that time. Road conditions in Indiana were not good during this period of history. This was true of roads in Wabash County. Frequently, they ran through heavy, unbroken timber native to some areas. There were the old Indian trails worn by white settlers between neighbors to the churches, schools, crossroads, stores, connecting with main roads to larger settlements, and so on. You may be sure station keepers and conductors were very much at home traveling, any of them in their own area. This knowledge, a quality of resourceful courage, and a liberal share of sagacity, combined with their dedication to purposes of the Underground Railroad, made these men formidable opponents. Slave hunters, when in pursuit of runaway slaves, thus conducted, being unfamiliar with their surroundings, were no match for the Underground. Daniel Sayers' comment on this phase of the situation was, there were very few of the pioneers who would hide a runaway slave, and the professional slave hunters from Kentucky who rode through the country on horseback armed with revolvers were universally execrated. Indeed, so bitterly hostile were the people that the slave hunters were quite fearful of their safety. Of course, they had their Confederates among us, who made money out of information they gave the hunters, but these too were held in general contempt. Sayer continues, how did we get the fugitives unobserved through the county? Well, it was mainly done by traveling by night. There weren't any roads to speak of, just simply a path marked out. And by traveling in an indirect route, we were able to dodge pursuers. The county was so sparsely settled that we were in little danger of meeting anyone. In spite of efforts made by the Underground in behalf of runaway slaves passing through Wabash County, some of them did not realize either freedom or Canada. In 1880, a Wabash newspaper published a historical ring, which gives us something of what could and did happen right here in our own county to a captured slave. In the county clerk's office is an ordinary iron ring used as a paperweight. It is made of 3/4-inch wrought iron and is about 3 inches in diameter. Such a ring could be picked up in any blacksmith shop. It is the association clustered around the ring in question which gives us the facts for this article. Many years ago, during the operation of the Underground Railroad, when the abolitionists helped a poor black to Canada, our older citizens will remember the arrest of a Kentucky slave in this county as he was on his way to liberty. He was confined in jail and his master sent for. Arriving, he loaded the slave with chains, and the ring we are writing about was used to connect the shackles around the poor slave's feet and hands. These shackles, the Kentuckian said, had been used in returning over 100 escaped slaves, worth in the aggregate over $150,000. You are probably anxious to know how the ring came into the possession of County Clerk Wiesner. The master and captured slaves started on the next boat down the canal. Some friendly abolitionist on board assisted the slave to cut the chains and escape when he was pursued and shot dead by his master. His body was found and buried in the western edge of the county, and the broken shackles and chains found on his body returned to the county jail where they were cut and used for various things until the big iron ring was all that was left. This was fastened to the floor, and unruly prisoners often chained to it. When the old jail was demolished, the ring was saved and put to a better use than it was ever intended for. While looking at the old ring, we could not help but think of all of the awful, stark, and gloomy associations surrounding its use, of the many escapes to gloomy swamps, of the clank of the old ring and its chains as the poor slaves were loaded with them and driven back to the thraldom and bondage. But the unpleasant memories are of the barbarous past, and it is gratifying to know that the days of iron rings and shackles, coupled with human slavery, are no more. Returning to Daniel Sayer, that he ran a station on the Underground is not definitely known, but it is known he could be depended upon for help when needed. One morning, he was awakened just before daylight by a knock on his door. A black man of about 45 years of age was there when Mr. Sayer answered the summons. He said he was a runaway, hungry and tired. He was given a loaf of bread and part of a boiled ham and told where to hide until the following night. In Sayer's words, less than an hour later, two rough-looking riders with horse pistols in their belts called me from the house to inquire if I had seen anything of a runaway N-word. Daniel Sayer threw up both hands, one pointing left and the other right, and replied, "That way." One of the riders drew his pistol and with an oath said, "If you don't tell me which way he went, I will kill you." Sayer's rifle hung near the cabin door. He had it in his hands in a jiffy, and drawing a bead on the rough customer said, "Now, if you don't leave these premises in 60 seconds, I will kill you." Both men were arrant cowards, and the way they hustled off the clearing was ludicrous. I was never molested afterward. That night, I went through the woods with the fugitive to Manchester, where he was given over to Place's charge and eventually made his way to Canada. I don't recall the arrest of anyone in this vicinity for aiding runaway slaves. It was well known that Kindley, Peabody, and Place were connected with the Underground Railroad, but so adroit were they that no proof could be secured to warrant their arrest. There were a good many of the older citizens engaged in the work of helping runaway slaves, but nobody knew of it. The scheme was to pilot the poor wretches to a station where they were placed in charge of another conductor, and nobody ever knew of your connection with the escape except the station keeper. Mr. Sayer once helped a party of 20 slaves get to North Manchester. Closely pursued, this train of 20 runaways reached that station safely, largely because of the conductor's superior knowledge of the country, which enabled them to take a different route from the one usually traveled. The party consisted chiefly of young men, 3 women, one of whom had a babe in arms. At another time, 7 slaves were taken through LeGros in a big Pennsylvania wagon, supposedly loaded with lumber. We now come to Martin McFarland, one of the most outstanding conductors and station keepers in the Wabash County area. An ardent abolitionist, possessed of great courage, he cheerfully, quote, faced risks in the performance of his duties as station keeper and conductor on the Underground Railroad, from which ordinary men would have shrunk with fear and trembling. That McFarland was an early settler in the vicinity of the Wabash-Huntington County line is evidenced by the fact that he was a proprietor of the town of New Holland, its plot being dated November 23rd, 1842. In 1841, he bought a quarter section of land from William McFarland, relationship unknown, described in the Huntington County records as the southwest quarter section of Section 34, Township 27, Rango 8 East, and his home was on the homestead. It was home to 2 generations of McFarlands, at least, after Martin's services on the Underground Railroad came to an end. Today, the farm buildings are in total ruins. The farm buildings stood a little east of the boundary line in Huntington County on the north side of what is now US Route 124, between the county line on the west and another north-south road now known as Route 105 on the east. One account says that Mr. McFarland lived near Lincolnville. This statement, however, is only partially accurate, dependent upon the author's conception of distances to points as related to Lincolnville within the area. His home was approximately 3 1/4 miles southeast of the latter village and less than 4 miles west of Mount Etna. The next station north from McFarland's was said to have been 40 miles distant, where he usually conducted fugitives to his care. To use the Wabash-Huntington boundary line route, he had to travel about a mile north of Route 124 to the first crossroad. Here, the road made a precipitant drop downhill to a creek valley below where it wound about, crossing Deer Creek, then Rush Creek after the 2. We got to go to 8 now. After the 2, there we go. After the 2 streams joined from 4 to 7 times in what would have been a mile as the crow flies. The number of fords to be negotiated was determined by weather conditions. During this period, there were no bridges at the time of the Underground Railroad movement, and for some time thereafter, riders swam through 1 to 2 fords during lengthy stretches of rainy weather, or used another and longer way round. The road arose from the creek valley to what was later called the Holland Pike, then north into New Holland, passing Frederick Kindley Station a short distance before reaching the village. A possible 100 feet north of the center of town, the way turned west between Hiram Pickering's tannery and his house to a ford across the Salamone River, a few hundred feet below the present bridge north of the village. Fording the river, the road turned north, ascending a steep hill. Here, McFarland had the choice of 3 routes. He could proceed east over a poor road through a small settlement to Andrews in Huntington County, where he would have been back on a present route 105, or after reaching the top of the hill. He could continue directly north, crossing the Wabash River near the site of Old Belden, or after going a mile on the second route, he could have turned west toward Dora, then west and north into LeGros. This was largely a fair weather route, but in favorable weather, the creek road through New Holland offered a wide area of country in which to lose himself, with help along the way in case of pursuit for both freight and wagon. On the other hand, Route 105 of that day crossed streams and was winding and hilly, but it led directly north for many miles, probably saving valuable time in reaching the next station. A choice of routes was up to McFarland, made to suit immediate situations. In the course of his service on the Underground, McFarland helped a great number of runaways to reach Canada. One source says the number was in the hundreds, but as with many things pertaining to the Underground Railroad, it is impossible to say definitely. By reputation, he was counted on in emergency, and a slave could consider himself safe after reaching the McFarland station. The slaves were carried in a large covered wagon drawn up by a pair of sturdy horses, capable of making quick work of a day's journey if close pursuit made it necessary. The bed of his wagon was built for the purpose of which it was used. A false bottom formed a secret compartment where his freight could be concealed if needed. He would start out at midnight with his load all ship shape, and daylight found him well on his way, the outfit revealing nothing to arouse suspicion as to its real character. A part of McFarland's route ran through a red-hot Democratic neighborhood, peopled with those as bitterly opposed to abolition as the slaveholders themselves, and quite ready to give information and aid to an owner of or his agent in retrieving slave property. Before reaching this danger spot, he would halt at a nursery belonging to an abolition friend who lived near the roadside. There, his wagon was filled with evergreens and a few peach and apple shrubs. At once, Martin assumed the appearance of a tree peddler. Thus, he blinded his enemies to his real mission, undisturbed by prying curiosity. The time came, however, when McFarland had a narrow escape from arrest and its consequences. Only his steady nerve brought him through safety with the 8 or 10 fugitives in his charge. This time he had started from his station later than usual and had gone a short distance when he was overtaken by a runner who reported a gang of slave hunters were in close pursuit and would catch up with him in a few minutes. A dense woods grew on each side of the road. Quickly halting his team, he called the slaves to come from hiding. Trembling, as from Wabash River shakes, their faces drawn with fear, the ex-slaves obeyed. With them standing in line beside the road, McFarland hurriedly explained the pending danger and ordered them to take to the forest, secrete themselves, and remain there until he returned and called them out. Hesitating an instant, the dark forms faded out of sight. Scarcely had McFarland climbed into the wagon seat and started his team when the slave catchers came alongside. The party consisted of 3 planters and 3 officers. Martin was ordered to halt. Then he was questioned closely as to his business. Not receiving satisfactory answers, they began to nose about the wagon. Finally, one man, a little sharper than the other, discovered the hiding place in the wagon bed. The straw on which the former slaves had been lying was still warm with the heat of their bodies, and McFarland was directly charged by the men with knowing about the slave for whom they were searching. "Well, since you are so wise," said the station keeper, who all the time had presented a bold, defiant front in the face of bluster and charges made against him, "why don't you find them? I don't know where they are, but I do know that I am going on about my business and that it won't be healthy for the man who interferes with me. By this time, Mr. McFarland's blood was up. This, combined with his bold station, intimidated. I'm going to keep reading. I was going to stop, but this is invigorating. 8, where's 9? There's page 9. There it is. The 6 men who reluctantly rode on and left him, their suspicions far from allayed. The slave catchers rode in advance for 4 or 5 miles, then turned at a crossroads and were gone for good insofar as this trip was concerned. Not entirely sure of this, however, he went on a few miles then. When nothing happened, he turned his team and, making fast work of it, soon came to the place where the former slaves had left the wagon for the woods. After assuring himself spies were not around, he called his charges. They were again stowed away, and the interrupted journey northward was resumed. He reached the next station without more adventure. After a few hours' rest, McFarland said goodbye to the runaways and left for home. Later, he was informed that every one of his charges reached freedom to Canada. During the many years Martin McFarland spent in serving the Underground Railroad, one can expect the rough and ready, even dangerous experiences put to a test his resourceful courage and humane characteristics as applied to his work. Wow. All right. So I'm going to stop the video now. Pretty much what you heard is, again, information from the pamphlet that was posted in yesterday's assignment. There are words in there that, because it was written in 1964 and more than likely written by a white person, we probably wouldn't use now, which again is like even more reason why we should be learning this stuff. Either way, hopefully you enjoyed that video, and we'll get more to it later on. Have a good one.